Tonight we step back into the soft, grainy hush of ancient Mesopotamia, where the wind blows fine sand across your face and something warm and thick simmers in the air. It smells earthy, fermented, faintly sweet. You're not walking into a bar, you're trudging into the very origins of urban life, where cities rise from the dust, and beer, well, beer is basically holding the whole operation together. The sun is punishing, the air dry enough to mummify a fig, and you're standing barefoot in a place where civilization first flickered into existence. There's no money yet. No coins. But you're watching a worker receive a scoop of barley mash, his pay. Because before the paycheck, there was the pint. Now, you might be picturing some quiet little village of people sipping in moderation and shaking hands like enlightened hipsters. But let me stop you right there. You're about to spend time in a world where beer rations were so essential, they got tracked on cuneiform tablets before literature even got its first sentence. And spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive a week here. Not unless you like waking up before sunrise, hauling mud bricks for 10 hours, and chugging a thick, unfiltered brew with the consistency of oatmeal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking the ancient land between the Tigris and Euphrates, where everything you know about human society is just beginning to bubble up. Somewhere to your left, a group of shirtless men haul reeds across a floodplain. To your right, an old woman measures water into a clay vat and stirs something dark and steaming. They don't know it yet, but what they're doing, those careful stirrings, those soaked grains, is going to echo for thousands of years. It's beer. And you're watching one of the earliest records of someone making it on purpose. Historians still argue whether beer was discovered accidentally, maybe some poor forager left soggy grain out too long, or if it was intentionally brewed from the start. But one thing they agree on, by around 4000 BCE, Mesopotamians were brewing it consistently, and it was a staple of life. The cradle of civilization wasn't just farming and flood control. It was beer, fermented and foamy, that tied together workers, priests, rulers, and gods. And the reason you're seeing so much activity around it is simple. In the brutal climate of southern Mesopotamia, drinking the river was often a terrible idea. Beer, boiled and fermented, was safer. Plus, it got you just tipsy enough to forget the giant mosquitoes and relentless tax collectors. You duck under the shade of a reed-thatched roof where a young scribe is hunched over a damp slab of clay. His stylus, a hollow reed, is clicking gently against the surface. You lean over his shoulder, squinting at the odd, wedge-shaped symbols. It's not poetry. It's not even a royal decree. It's a beer receipt. These early pictographic records, evolving soon into true cuneiform, show barley being allocated to workers. Sometimes it's measured in shekels, sometimes in sila, an ancient volume unit roughly equal to about a liter. You see a name, a number, a little drawing of a jar, and maybe a crude sketch of a head next to it. 3 sila, given to Galzu, bricklayer. The symbols look simple, but they're doing something monumental, keeping track of who gets beer, and how much. Without coins or calculators, the Sumerians are already managing logistics worthy of a startup payroll app. And here's a fun detail, some tablets even include little round symbols that scholars believe represent froth. That's right, someone 5,000 years ago may have felt strongly enough about head retention to document it in clay. You shift through time and find yourself in Eridu, maybe Uruk, stepping over broken pottery and bits of barley husks. Your sandals crunch on the packed earth as you pass more of these open-air brewing pits. Clay vats, lined with bitumen, are filled with semi-liquid mash. There's no hops, Mesopotamian beer didn't have that bitter bite. Instead, it's thick, sweet, cloudy, and consumed with a straw. Usually a long one, with a filter on the end to keep the solids out of your teeth. It's not just food. It's identity. It's ritual. It's medicine. And somehow, it's also math. And now, here's the kicker. Some modern scholars think beer might have come before bread. Imagine that. You're not domesticating barley so you can have toast, you're doing it so you can get buzzed after a long day of dodging snakes and shoveling silt. But not everyone agrees. The beer before bread theory is one of those hotly debated scholarly questions. Was brewing the original motivation for agriculture? Or was beer just a delightful bonus that came with farming? We may never know for sure. But let's be honest, if you were choosing between stale grain biscuits or a jug of malty goodness, which would you pick? You duck behind a wall as a group of administrators walk past in their finely woven cloaks, talking animatedly about grain deliveries and temple quotas. You can tell these guys have power not because they carry swords, but because they carry tablets. Beer, in this world, is serious infrastructure. And this dusty, sweltering city is essentially one big brewing ecosystem. Fields of barley, channels of irrigation, breweries tucked behind temples, and scribes recording every drop with bureaucratic precision. And the system works until it doesn't. But we'll save that mess for later. Right now, you're catching the scent of roasted grain, maybe even a hint of honey. A batch is being poured into large urns, some of them labeled for soldiers, others for priests, and a few for common laborers. Different roles, different rations. Priests might get more refined brews, while workers make do with a sludgy variety known today as cash. You don't ask too many questions about ingredients. Not unless you want to know what fermented date pulp smells like in a heat wave. You crouch beside another scribe, this one slightly older and definitely tipsy. He waves his stylus in a lazy circle and grins at you. Beer, he slurs in Sumerian, is the joy of the gods. Then he promptly passes out on his own ledger. And you look at the etched tablet he dropped, marked with symbols for beer, grain, and a name long since lost to time. You're not just watching history, you're watching accounting. Possibly the oldest kind we have. Not taxes. Not kings. Not love poems. Just beer. You're still crouched near that snoring scribe, and now the midday sun casts long shadows across his tablet. The clay is still damp, the symbols a little smeared, maybe he drooled on it. The stylus he dropped rolls slightly, leaving a soft dent in the dust. You reach down, pick it up, and suddenly you're holding the ancient Mesopotamian equivalent of a spreadsheet column. Because beer, as it turns out, made cuneiform necessary. Historians still argue whether writing developed strictly for religious purposes or for state administration. But when you trace the earliest examples, you keep running into barley rations, beer logs, supply records. The first signs of writing aren't love letters or manifestos, they're IOUs for barley mash. The reed stylus in your hand has a chisel tip. It's not used to draw pictures, but to press wedges into wet clay left to right, top to bottom, in tidy rows. There's a rhythm to it. Press. Tilt. Rotate. You can almost hear the mental counting in the scribe's head. 5 sila to the brewer, 6 to the priest, 1 to that guy who keeps stealing bricks. Now the scene shifts. You're inside a small workshop, shaded and warm. There's a stack of tablets arranged neatly like unsent emails. A young boy, maybe 10, is practicing glyphs on a scrap of clay. His instructor, a stern-faced woman with beer-colored stains on her robe, corrects his lines with the same intensity as a modern math teacher with a red pen. They're not writing full sentences yet. This is accounting language, proto-cuneiform. Instead of full grammar, it's a series of numeric signs and pictograms. A jar shape for beer, a barley stalk, a human head, a stroke for 1, a wedge for 10. Put them together, and you've got something like, this person gets this much beer, this often. It's not elegant prose, but it's data. And data, even back then, equals power. In one corner, there's a shelf holding something strangely beautiful, hollow, bulbous jars sealed with clay stoppers. A few have string tags. One has a pressed stamp with a symbol you can't quite interpret. It looks like a mountain crossed with a fish. Maybe it's a family mark. Or maybe the brewer just liked fishy hills. Fringe scholars believe some of these seals doubled as quality assurance stamps, early beer branding, basically. You lean in, sniff the air. There's a faint sourness, like old bread left in the sun too long. The beer is fermenting in there, wild yeasts doing their magic. You'd probably gag if you drank it now, but wait a day or two, and you'll have something thick, mildly alcoholic, and surprisingly nutritious. This wasn't just booze. It was liquid bread, rich with calories and vitamins. Workers could survive on it, often did. Some temples had entire wings devoted to brewing. You walk past one now, watching women pour milled grain into vats, stirring with long wooden paddles. Their hands move in a steady, practiced rhythm, and their faces are calm. Beer wasn't just survival, it was a sacred duty. Temples brewed for gods, for festivals, for ceremonies. And, let's be honest, for themselves. You sneak a look at another tablet resting nearby. This one's a little fancier. Not just symbols, but lines of text, decorative borders. It's a record of a beer offering 25 Sila, made to Inanna, goddess of love, war, and celestial hangovers. The scribe's handwriting is elegant, almost proud. You can tell this wasn't just accounting, it was devotion. You half expect him to kiss the tablet goodnight. There's even a unique beer goddess, Ninkasi. Her name means lady who fills the mouth. Temples to Ninkasi sang hymns that doubled as brewing instructions. Like if your favorite IPA came with sheet music. And yes, her hymn includes poetic lines about mashing the grain, fermenting in great vats, and pouring the brew like the onrush of the Tigris and Euphrates. That's some lyrical lager energy right there. Now, fun twist, some early tablets contain not just beer measurements but tallies of who drank the beer. Not just workers and priests, but animals. Donkeys, dogs, even pigs occasionally appear in the logs. Whether they actually drank it or just knocked over the jars is unclear. But you can imagine the chaos. One drunken goat staggering through a barley field, knocking over everyone's rations. Wouldn't be the first time livestock messed with payroll. As you wander deeper into the workshop, you spot another curious item, a small wooden abacus-like frame. Pebbles rest in rows, each one placed with care. Not everyone could read, but plenty could count. Beer distribution required more than writing, it required administration. You've got delivery routes, storage calculations, and daily allotments to manage. And it gets even nerdier. Some beer logs break down rations by social rank. A temple priest might get 8 Sila per day. A skilled mason? 4. A prisoner or slave? 2. The math is encoded into the script itself, and in many cases, so is the schedule. Weekly tallies, festival increases, even sick day reductions. One particularly odd tablet includes a footnote that may translate to absent due to snakebite. You almost want to send that to HR. Historians still debate whether these records were strictly practical, or if they also had a legal force. Were they enforceable contracts, or just glorified notes to self? Whatever the case, the scribes took them seriously. Some even signed them. One guy named Lugula seems to have had a whole career just writing about beer. Imagine putting that on your LinkedIn. You head out as dusk begins to fall. The city hums with quiet motion, families cooking, children playing near canals, old men arguing about the best brewing barley. Overhead, stars blink on like shy gods peeking through the haze. Somewhere, a dog barks. Somewhere else, Someone drops a jug and curses loud enough to scare birds off the ziggurat. You've seen the early evolution of writing, and it all circles back to this one thing: tracking beer. Not taxes. Not law codes. Not even war. Beer. It wasn't just what you drank after work. It was work. It was pay. It was status, ritual, nutrition, and sometimes, if you weren't careful, a hangover with historical significance. You stretch your back as you rise from the scribal school, feet sore from standing on packed earth all day. A breeze carries the smell of barley mash across the courtyard, a warm, yeasty scent that clings to your clothes. It's late afternoon, and the golden sun washes over the tall silhouette of a ziggurat in the distance. And right there, beside its looming shadow, a line is forming. Not for prayer. For rations. You shuffle forward with the others, mud brick haulers, reed weavers, canal diggers, all tired, sunburned, and smelling faintly of smoke and sweat. In front of you, a man wipes his brow and mutters something about his quota being doubled again. At least the bee's still thick, he says with a crooked smile. You're standing in line to collect your pay, and pay means beer. This isn't a tavern or a casual after-work hangout. This is the distribution point for daily rations, set up by temple officials or palace bureaucrats. Workers in Mesopotamian cities like Uruk or Nippur didn't earn wages in silver or coins, those didn't even exist yet. They were paid in essentials: grain, oil, sometimes wool. But the most precious item? A frothy, gritty jug of beer. Depending on your role, your daily ration might be as high as 5 liters or as low as 1. You glance at the scribe at the front of the line, perched behind a reed mat desk like a very dusty DMV worker. He checks a name against a clay tablet, nods to the server, and a jug is filled. Not all beer is equal, though. The laborious receive the basic stuff, thick and lumpy, almost chewable. Brewed from crushed barley bread, soaked and fermented in vats, and poured unfiltered into earthenware jars. You drink it with a straw, one long enough to reach past the crust that floats on top. It's sour, slightly fizzy, a bit warm. But after a full day of lugging bricks under a 105-degree sun, it tastes like heaven. You finally get to the front. The scribe squints at your name. 3 Sila, he grunts. Standard allotment. You nod, and your jug is filled from a larger vat. You catch a glimpse of a little floating tag tied to the tap, a pictogram of barley and a tiny sun. It's a code for the bee's grade. Not great, but not the worst. And here's the thing, this ritual, this entire queuing up process. It happened every single day in cities across Sumer. Temples and state-run institutions employed thousands of people, farmers, bricklayers, artisans, and they all expected their daily rations. And because beer didn't store well for long periods, it had to be brewed constantly. This wasn't your casual weekend batch of homebrew. This was a supply chain. You move aside to sip your ration, and nearby, someone's having a minor breakdown. Turns out his name was left off the tablet. Maybe the scribe forgot, maybe someone scratched him off, or maybe he just showed up late too many times. Either way, no beer today. His arguing now, arms waving, voice cracking. The clerk shrugs, rules are rules. But don't worry. Someone always has a friend who can sneak them a little from temple reserves, for a price. Historians still argue whether these beer rations were universal or based more strictly on status. Some believe every worker got a basic amount. Others think rations varied wildly, especially when times were tight or crops failed. Either way, beer was the great leveler. Even royalty drank it, though theirs was filtered, flavored, and probably served in something gold-plated with little lions on the sides. You wander to the edge of the courtyard and notice a side queue, shorter, quieter, and dressed in softer linens. These are not laborious. These are scribes, junior priests, and temple bookkeepers. Their rations are smaller in volume, but better in quality. Clearer beer, maybe brewed with honey or dates. The smell alone tells you it's less gritty and more refined. You overhear a scribe mutter about inventory running low and the need to record substitutions. "Barley is thin this season," he says. "We may have to dilute next month's brew." So yes, even in ancient Mesopotamia, your company was definitely cutting corners. Still, beer was serious business. Too serious to be left to chance. That's why you find administrative systems wrapped tightly around every aspect of the process: harvest logs, fermentation schedules, delivery lists. One mishandled ration meant unrest. A week-long shortage? Riot territory. And there were riots. We have records, barely decipherable fragments, that describe civil disruptions tied to food and beer shortages. Some fringe theories even suggest a failed beer distribution might have sparked a temple coup. Can you imagine getting overthrown because someone watered down the ale? Not impossible. Now, you wander toward the edge of the work compound and into a shaded hut. This is where the beer is brewed. Inside, the air is sticky and wet. It smells like porridge left too long on the stove. Baskets of malted barley are stacked against the wall. A huge vat bubbles ominously in the corner, the foam rising in lazy pulses. A brewer stirs with a long paddle, humming a song, possibly a hymn to Ninkasi, beer goddess of the perfect pour. You notice the brewer's hands are stained dark from barley malt. A jar nearby contains bapir, a twice-baked barley bread crumbled into the mash. It acts as the grain base for the brew, one of the key ingredients, along with dates, emmer wheat, and water from carefully selected sources. Some tablets even mention beer types. One translated as black beer likely refers to a dark, stronger variety. Another, called red beer, may have had fruit infusions. There's sweet beer, and even one with a name that scholars still haven't cracked, though theories range from thick enough to walk on to "you'll regret this in the morning." You step outside again and catch a glimpse of two children walking with small jugs, likely carrying beer back home to their families. It wasn't just for adults, kids drank it too, though theirs was usually more diluted. Think of it like ancient Capri Sun, just way funkier and slightly alcoholic. Night falls, and the city quiets. Workers retreat into mud-brick homes, sipping their rations by lamplight. The stars glitter over canals that reflect dim torchlight. Somewhere, a reed flute plays a lazy tune. You lean back against a wall, sipping your own brew slowly. It's thick, warm, and deeply strange, but nourishing. And somehow, comforting. In this world, beer is everywhere. It's not a side note. It's the note. The currency of survival, the taste of rest after a backbreaking day, the daily ritual that glues the whole city together. And tomorrow, the line will form again. The torchlight flickers across stone walls as you follow a narrow path away from the workyards and into a quieter part of the city, temple grounds. The chanting has stopped for the evening, but something lingers in the air. Not incense. Not oil. Barley. And something faintly toasted. You tiptoe between pillars and into the temple courtyard where priests once offered gifts to the gods and kept meticulous records of what went into those offerings. You know what shows up on a shocking number of these lists. Beer. Beer by the vat. Beer by the jar. Beer for the gods, for the priests, for the festivals, and for whoever happened to be keeping the books. See, beer wasn't just about hydration and nutrition. It was also a sacred offering. You creep through the high arch into a shadowy brewing room nestled deep in temple territory. Large vessels line the walls, sealed with waxy lids, each one tagged with string and stamped clay seals. These aren't ration brews. This is divine beer. And it smells better. Less sludge, more spice. You see one vat marked with a pictograph that includes a star, likely a sign it's meant for the gods, not the workers. This batch is probably made with finer grain, possibly even infused with dates or honey. You want to dip a finger in. You don't. You move toward an alcove where a tablet rests atop a clay pedestal, this one not a receipt, but a prayer. A hymn to Ninkasi. You recite a line quietly in your head as your finger hovers over the ancient wedge-shaped signs. Ninkasi, you are the one who handles the dough, and with a big shovel, mix the beer in a pit. That's right, the Sumerians didn't just brew beer, they sang about it. Literally. The hymn to Ninkasi is one of the oldest known pieces of literature, and it doubles as a brewing manual. Scholars still debate how exact the recipe is. Was it symbolic or functional? Could we actually recreate a Ninkasi-style brew today and expect it to taste like theirs? Fringe experiments have tried. Some with success. Some with results best left to brave archaeologists and very forgiving taste buds. In this temple space, beer isn't just fermented cereal water, it's ritual. Offered to gods like Inanna, Enki, and Utu. A sort of holy communion, but with foam. Sometimes poured out ceremonially. Sometimes left to ferment for future celebration. Always counted. Always logged. One record you pass mentions a festival where over 400 vats of beer were prepared for a 3-day celebration. Not all for drinking, some were poured out as libations, spilled onto the earth as an offering. Talk about the gods getting the good stuff. You sit quietly near the altar and close your eyes. The stone beneath you is cool, but the air hums with a warmth left behind by the day's sun and 100 boiling vats. You imagine the chants, the firelight, the shuffle of bare feet and long robes. This wasn't just production, it was performance. Back outside, you notice a temple servant carefully inscribing a tablet. His listing inventory: barley in, jars out, firewood used, number of temple staff rationed for beer that week. His stylus moves with practiced ease. This is not a temporary job. He likely trained for years to read and write cuneiform, just to track beer. The irony: most of the scribes you see weren't high priests or philosophers. They were beer accountants. People whose job it was to make sure Enki didn't run short of suds during a ritual feast. And they weren't above a little creative arithmetic either. Historians still argue whether temple records reflect actual quantities or just idealized figures. There's evidence of some, let's say, generous rounding. A few tablets show errors in tallying that just happen to result in extra jars going unaccounted for. How convenient. You peek around a corner where 2 workers are hauling fresh jars into a back storage room. One whispers to the other, "This one's for the priests," as if that explains why it smells sweeter. You're not sure if that's protocol or petty temple favoritism. Probably both. And the deeper you go, the more you realize this isn't just a religious structure, it's a brewery with divine branding. Some temples even became beer monopolies, with full control over local production and distribution. They owned the land, grew the grain, baked the barley cakes, and fermented the brew. Then they distributed it to both the gods and the workforce. It's like a corporate office with a chapel and a brewery all under one clay roof. You walk out of the temple grounds as the stars multiply overhead. The ziggurat casts a long, solemn shadow across the baked earth, but down here, among the workers and priests, people are still sipping quietly. You pass a couple sharing a jar near a doorway, the straw between them like a bridge. A child sleepily reaches for a diluted drink. Someone, somewhere, is already preparing tomorrow's mash. You stop and look back at the temple, its silhouette glowing under moonlight. You think of the vats, the prayers, the records, the rituals. You can't help but smile. Because no matter how divine they made it sound, it's still beer. Warm. Sticky. Possibly a little funky. But also, sacred. You wake the next morning to the smell of damp reeds, cracked grain, and the unmistakable tang of leftover beer crusting the rim of a clay cup. Around you, the city hums to life. But today, You're not with the workers or the priests. You're following the trail of someone whose cup never runs dry, the elite. The Sumerian upper class. Rulers, governors, priests with more influence than the gods they serve. These are the people who don't wait in line for their beer. They have it delivered, served, and most importantly, documented in style. You slip through the gates of a palatial courtyard, the walls high and painted with faded murals. Inside, a servant pours beer from a ceramic jug into a bronze goblet. It's not frothy and chunky like what the workers drink, it's clear, filtered, and steeped in spices. Possibly even cooled in deep cellars with imported snow from distant mountain peaks. Alright, that last bit might be poetic exaggeration, but it's true that elites had better beer, and more of it. With access to the best grains and skilled brewers, their brews came with flair. Some tablets mention brews with date syrup or rare herbs added for flavor. One fragment even suggests beer mixed with honey and saffron, fringe theory or royal cocktail. Historians are still undecided. You lean over a low table where an administrator is reading a clay tablet aloud. It lists the monthly rations not for workers, but for palace guests. One official, visiting from a neighboring city-state, has been allotted 10 sila of special beer per day. 10. That's enough to knock over an ox. Or at least make one dance inappropriately at a banquet. And speaking of banquets, this is where beer becomes performance. You're invited, sort of. You stand quietly near the edge of a large, columned hall as musicians tune lyres and dancers prepare in the corner. On the long tables are plates of dried figs, grilled fish, and a few delicacies that are probably best left unidentified. In front of each guest, a drinking vessel, no two exactly alike. One man drinks from a golden cup shaped like a ram's head. Another uses a tall cylinder painted with stylized barley stalks. You feel vaguely underdressed. Some of these cups even had special spouts to let the drinker bypass sediment. Others had built-in strainers like ancient beer tech. The music begins, and the beer flows. This is more than celebration, it's politics. These feasts were opportunities to impress allies, bribe opponents, and show the gods you knew how to throw a proper party. After all, if your city's ruler could afford to bathe in beer and still have enough left over to serve 300 guests, surely the gods would smile upon you. You watch as a royal scribe discreetly checks a tally. Yes, even here, amid laughter and song, someone's tracking who drank what, how much, and from which storeroom it came. It's not just about who got tipsy. It's about record-keeping, accountability, and showing you can manage abundance without chaos. Though to be fair, a little chaos was expected. One guest slumps to the side, mumbling praise to Ninkasi as a servant gently refills his cup anyway. Another, more sober, debates barley taxes with a priest, their words slurring into mutual agreement after the third round. You can't help but smile. Some things really haven't changed. But make no mistake, this isn't all leisure. Beer in these circles was also symbol. It marked status, reinforced hierarchy. You'd never catch a king sipping the workers' slop. And if you did, it would probably be the start of a parable or a revolt. Or both. One tablet from a royal archive mentions a gift of beer sent between kings. Not gold. Not weapons. Beer. A diplomatic gesture of high importance. You imagine two rulers, each weighing the taste of the other's brew like modern politicians sampling wine at a summit. Ah, a fine 2379 vintage. Tastes like victory over Elam. You drift further into the complex, through quieter halls and storage rooms. Here, sealed jars line the walls, each one labeled in cuneiform. These aren't just supplies. They're reserves. Backup beer. A literal rainy day fund. And some are tagged with odd symbols, possibly denoting flavor, strength, or ritual use. One fringe interpretation even claims to have found a sick day beer, lighter and mixed with herbs. Could be medicinal. Could just be hangover relief. Back in the courtyard, you overhear a young official arguing with a scribe. His ration was short by 2 sila last month, and he's not letting it go. The scribe sighs, taps his tablet, and gestures to the log. You missed the barley festival. That day was deducted. This is the beauty of Mesopotamian beer culture. Even the powerful had to negotiate the math. You find a stone bench and sit for a moment, letting the rich smells of baked bread, warm beer, and perfumed oil drift over you. The elite may not stir the mash or carry the grain, but their entire lifestyle is woven through with beer, from worship to politics to party games that occasionally ended in marriage proposals or royal tantrums. And there's a certain irony to it. Because no matter how fancy the goblet, no matter how gilded the banquet, that beer started in the same way, grain-soaked, mashed, left to bubble. It's still the same magic sludge that built cities and stirred scribes to scribble numbers in wet clay. You rise again, glancing at the half-full jar beside the scribe's seat. You wonder if he's keeping a little extra for himself. Probably. The morning sun filters through thick linen curtains as you enter a quieter courtyard tucked behind the temple walls. There's incense in the air, but beneath it, always beneath it, is that familiar scent, fermenting grain, earth, and time. And seated at the far edge of the courtyard, beneath a canopy of woven reeds, is someone different. Not a priest. Not a bricklayer. Not a royal scribe. She's dressed in finely woven fabric, her hair coiled into braids wrapped with copper wire, and her gaze is calm, but piercing. This is Enheduanna, high priestess of the moon god Nana, daughter of Sargon of Akkad, poet, and, perhaps today, reviewer of brew. You sit quietly as she speaks softly to a servant who pours her a small cup of beer. It's dark and slightly fragrant, probably a sweeter brew reserved for ceremonial use. She tastes it, nods, and says something you can't hear. The servant bows and retreats with the jar. It's easy to forget, in a world dominated by city kings and scribal bureaucrats, that women like Enheduanna weren't just figureheads. They held enormous religious power, supervised temple economies, and yes, oversaw the brewing process. Especially when beer was being offered to gods, or served during ritual ceremonies. You look around and realize something else. Most of the brewing staff here? Women. Brew mistresses, grain sifters, vat watchers. You hear laughter from behind a wall and peek around to find a group kneading barley cakes, breaking up the bapir that will soon become the next sacred batch. There's something rhythmic about it. The way their hands move. The way the barley crumbles just so. The way they sing under their breath, not quite hymns, not quite gossip, something in between. Maybe that's what Enheduanna listens for. Maybe that's part of the ritual. Now here's the quirky part. One fragment from an old Babylonian tablet includes what may be the earliest recorded beer-tasting note. Scholars are still deciphering the exact wording, but it reads something like, "Sweet upon the tongue, dark like the new moon, with the aftertaste of victory." Not exactly malty with notes of caramel and chestnut, but close enough. You follow Enheduanna into the inner temple as she prepares for the evening rite. A jar of beer is carried before her, resting on a cloth-covered tray. It's not for her. It's for Nana. An offering to the moon god, who apparently has a taste for barley-based beverages. This is the divine side of beer rationing. It's not about calories or hydration. It's about presence. When you offer beer to the gods, you're giving them what you yourself need most. Sustenance. Warmth. Comfort. A shared moment of mortal flavor. As the ritual begins, she raises a cup, tilts it slightly, and chants something in Sumerian that echoes off the temple walls. The beer is poured, not drunk, slowly onto the ground, as an offering. The earth drinks first. You watch in silence, and for a moment, It's easy to see how sacred this all feels. Beer isn't just liquid. It's a bridge between the earthly and the divine, between the clay tablets of the ration clerks and the carved stone of the gods' altars. Historians still argue about how much of these rituals were symbolic versus economic. Did the gods truly need the offerings? Or were the rituals just a public excuse for redistributing supplies to priests and administrators? Either way, the record-keeping was real. The beer was brewed. The vats were cleaned. And the names of the responsible parties were logged with ruthless precision. You wander back into the courtyard as dusk approaches. A scribe is sitting cross-legged near the reed fence, inscribing a new tablet. You peek over his shoulder. It's a temple audit. It lists, line by line, the following: how much barley was received, how much beer was baked, how many jars of beer were brewed, how many were poured in offering, and how many were consumed by the temple staff. There's a note at the bottom: quality of the third vat, thin, foamy, unfit for inanna. OOF. Someone's getting written up for that. The temple economy was, in many ways, a brewery economy. Grain in, beer out. Labor paid. Offerings made. Debts settled. Ceremonies performed. All with beer at the center. And in Heduana, she's not just performing rites. She's managing a supply chain. Think of it. A woman, over 4,000 years ago, not only composing hymns and shaping theology but ensuring her God gets the good stuff. Reviewing brewing batches. Supervising grain shipments. Keeping scribes in line. You can almost hear her say, "This one's too sour. Send it back." You walk past a few low jars resting under a pergola. The lids are stamped with a unique seal, a crescent moon, and a stylized barley stalk. Her mark. Her signature. We know in Heduana through her poetry, some of the oldest signed writing in history. But if she were alive today, she'd probably run a craft brewery and publish spiritual essays on the side. She's the kind of person who'd hold a beer tasting and a book club in the same room, and you'd stay for both. As night settles in, the temple staff eat their evening meal. They break bread, scoop up stew, and sip beer quietly under the stars. Their laughter is softer now, more tired. But behind every bite, every sip, is a trail of labor, leadership, and a woman with copper in her braids and steel in her eyes. Enheduanna doesn't speak as she retires to her chambers. But the ledger is complete, the brew is blessed, and the moon is full above the ziggurat. The gods are pleased. And the beer? Still flowing. By the time you've retraced your steps back through the temple's rear gates, the city is waking up again, grumbling, yawning, stretching limbs in the dusty heat. It's a new day, which means barley must be measured, fires lit, and more beer brewed. But today you follow a different thread, not to the priests or the workers, but to the quiet thrum of Mesopotamian bureaucracy. Oh yes. Bureaucracy, possibly humanity's most ancient form of shared suffering. You pass rows of low-walled offices tucked behind the temple, where scribes sit under awnings, their clay tablets spread out like modern spreadsheets. The atmosphere smells like warm dust, old barley, and someone else's responsibilities. You're here to watch how the gears really turn. Because while priests chant and brewers stir, it's the administrators who keep the beer moving, rations calculated, jars accounted for, and everyone's weekly intake logged like clockwork. You step into a shaded workspace where a group of scribes hunch over clay blocks, their styluses tapping in an almost rhythmic cadence. They don't look up. Not because they're too pious, but because someone messed up a batch count yesterday, and now there's a full-blown audit. You move closer to the lead scribe, a wiry man with a forehead permanently creased from squinting. He's muttering to himself, checking a tablet marked with rows of barley units, beer outputs, and individual names. He flicks his stylus in irritation. 14 sila to the eastern diggers, he says. But only 13 recorded delivered. A pause. Someone coughed. Someone definitely lied. This is how beer wasn't just consumed, it was administered. Like oxygen in a space capsule. Or Wi-Fi at a coffee shop. If the numbers didn't line up, everything fell apart. Now, here's the quirky bit. Archaeologists have uncovered tablets from administrative offices that include not just rations, but corrections, too. Tiny wedge-shaped symbols that translate to things like, rectified on the 5th day, or sila deducted for tardiness, or even extra granted on festival day. That's right. Bureaucratic beer bonuses. You peer over another scribe's shoulder and spot what appears to be a multi-column inventory. There are marks for input barley, output beer, wastage, yes, spillage was tracked, and consumption. It's beer math, and it's surprisingly advanced. Historians still argue whether these log systems were local to each temple or part of a broader centralized management. Some believe there were regional beer officials responsible for coordinating between temples, markets, and state storage. Others think each temple was a self-contained beer republic, managing its own output like a foamy little fiefdom. Either way, you're watching one of the earliest known bureaucratic models take shape, not for taxation, not even for law, but for beer logistics. And yes, there were rules. You step into another room, smaller, stuffier. On the wall hangs a faded clay relief, a stylized barley sheaf crossed with what looks like a brewing paddle. Below it, a worn tablet sits on a stone table. A set of rules. It lists proper fermentation times, temperature guidelines, approximated through day counts and heat descriptions, and storage instructions. There's even a clause that warns against diluting the beer beyond acceptable foam. Which is ancient for, don't water down the good stuff. You chuckle, but then you remember, this is serious business. Too thin a brew, and workers get weak. Too strong, and no one gets anything done. Consistency was crucial, and the administrators made sure of it. Often, with terrifying thoroughness. Outside, a brewer runs in, breathless. The northern vat is spoiled, he blurts. The lead scribe doesn't flinch. He just reaches for a fresh clay tablet and starts calculating the grain loss. You trail them out to the storerooms. Huge jars, some as tall as your chest, are lined up like sleepy guards. Each is marked with a tiny clay tag, strung with twine, listing the type of beer, its production date, and intended recipients. You peek inside one. It's darker than the others, richer in scent, and bubbling ever so slightly. A fresh batch. The tablet beside it says it's destined for a canal-digging crew due in 2 days. Imagine finishing a grueling 16-hour trench shift and not getting your beer. Unthinkable. But now the records are being amended. Adjustments noted. 1 batch spoiled. Fine. Recalculate. Reassign. Maybe deduct a little from the temple staff ration. They won't like it. Maybe borrow from a neighboring district's surplus. Someone runs off to negotiate. Another scribe starts copying new allocation tablets. This is what administration looked like in ancient Mesopotamia. Not grey suits and bad coffee, but dust, sweat, and high-stakes beer math on sun-baked clay. And mistakes. Oh, they were remembered. One discovered tablet includes a formal complaint filed against a junior scribe. On the 10th day of the festival, he recorded 8 jars when only 6 were present. That's not just a slip, that's the Mesopotamian equivalent of embezzling beer. There's even speculation among fringe scholars that some tablets were part of disciplinary hearings, tiny legal dramas carved in clay over missing mugs. You can almost picture it. A terrified clerk trying to explain that he really did see 8 jars, but someone else moved them before the audit. You sit down on a warm stone near the storeroom and let the afternoon lull settle in. A fly buzzes lazily near your ear. The air smells like clay and ferment. And you think, with a sleepy grin, that somewhere in these scribbled rows and forgotten vats, An entire civilization stayed functional because someone cared enough to count the foam. The day winds down. The scribes are closing their work with a final stamp, usually a cylinder seal, rolled carefully across the soft clay. Each seal unique. Each one proof that a person was here, did the math, tracked the beer, and probably blamed someone else for the missing 2 jars. Because even then, paperwork didn't lie. But people? Oh, people always did. You stretch your legs as the sun dips low over the ziggurat skyline, casting long shadows that slip between brick walls and barley carts. The heat's finally letting go, replaced by a warm breeze that smells faintly of date syrup and baked earth. But there's one place still buzzing with activity, just beyond the temple district, where the workers' quarters begin. You walk toward it slowly, the sound of clinking pottery and low chatter guiding you. This isn't a sacred courtyard or a storage vault, this is where regular laborists wind down after long days of digging canals, hauling bricks, or pounding grain. And what do they wind down with? Beer, of course. Lots of it. You duck under a reed awning and step into a small courtyard packed with rough-hewn benches and wide ceramic jars half buried in cool sand. Someone hands you a small cup. It's lukewarm, thick, a little sour, definitely not temple quality, but it's nourishing, and better than stale river water. Here, rations are more than sustenance. They're compensation. They're morale. They're currency. You watch as a foreman distributes drinking portions, measured with a carved dipper, according to each worker's rank and recent performance. The big guys laying foundation stones get more than the guys painting glyphs. And anyone who slacked off today? Yeah, their share is noticeably foamy. It's all part of the deal. In Mesopotamia, beer wasn't just for festivals or offerings. It was paycheck in a jar. In fact, one of the most famous rationing tablets from the city of Uruk details weekly beer and bread allocations for hundreds of workers, each entry a name, a role, and the amount due. No gold, no silver. Just silos of beer. You squint at a tablet hanging nearby, tied to a peg with reed cord. It's simple, rectangular, worn smooth around the edges. But etched into its surface is a record that goes something like this. Amasin. Mover of timbers. 2 sila per day. Bonus half sila during flood season. You grin. A classic overtime perk. Now here's a quirky angle, some rations were even flavored. Yes, flavored. Texts mention varieties of beer infused with dates, coriander, and even honey. Imagine showing up to work and arguing with your foreman over which flavor you're getting that day. You gave a Murray date beer and I got plain again? Come on. Of course, there's still debate about exactly how beer was consumed. Historians have long puzzled over those iconic depictions of groups sipping from a communal jar with long reeds, like ancient cocktail hour, but with more back pain. Were those straws for filtering solids? Were they status symbols? Was it all just for ceremony, or did everyone do it that way? No one agrees. And that's kind of the fun. You lean back and watch as the sun slips below the city walls. A kid passes by with a jug nearly his own size, wobbling as he carries it to his mother, probably a brewer herself, who waves you over. You follow. Her name's Ira. She's not a priest or a scribe, just a community brewer whose small clay oven and wide jars are tucked into the side of her courtyard. You watch her grind barley, mix it with water and bapir, and let it rest in a vat covered with a reed mat. No thermometers. No fancy timers. Just instinct, smell, and the faint fizz of living yeast. She stirs it slowly, humming a lullaby. The rhythm of brewing is personal here. Practical. Domestic. Cultural. And her daughter. She's pressing clay into little stamp molds, probably for sealing the jars once the brew's done. Even at 5, she's part of the chain. Just like Ira's mother was. Just like her grandmother before that. You take another sip of your beer and feel the soft weight of that history settle into your chest. This isn't just about fermentation or math. It's about people. About communities that survived on grain and water and patience. Ira shows you one of her jars, a squat, hand-painted thing marked with a crescent and a line of dots. Not cuneiform. Just a family symbol. A quiet reminder that beer wasn't only handled by elite temple scribes. It was also made in backyards. Traded between neighbors. Gifted during births. Poured during funerals. She offers you a fresh batch, cooler than the last. Thicker. Creamier. Almost like breakfast in a bowl. It's good. And you can't help but laugh, because somewhere, 1,000 miles away and 1,000 years later, someone is trying to invent a beer smoothie and claiming it's a modern innovation. You sit with Ira and her neighbors as the stars come out, watching as they pass jars around, tell stories, and count out barley portions for tomorrow's brew. Someone accidentally kicks over a half-full vessel, and there's a collective groan. Not because of the mess, but because they know exactly how much labor just hit the dirt. This isn't just beer. It's time. It's labor. It's lifeblood. You glance back toward the temple, its peak still visible even in the fading light. There, beer was sacred. Tracked. Ritualized. But here, among the ordinary people, it's intimate. Tangible. Human. And just like that, you begin to understand. Beer wasn't a product. It was a promise. A promise that, after all the sunburns and sand in your shoes, the broken carts and chipped jars, the arguments and audits and clay dust air, you'd sit down, take a sip, and remember that you're alive. The next morning greets you with a soft hum, birds rising with the heat, the scuff of sandals on stone, and the creak of donkey carts carrying bundles of fresh barley. You're heading somewhere special today. Not another temple. Not another storeroom. But the edge of the city, where a different kind of record keeper lives. You wind through narrow alleys until the houses thin out, and there, among dry reeds and grazing goats, is a low mud brick house with a wooden awning. Beneath it sits an old man, cross-legged, with a beard that could double as a barley broom. He's not a scribe. Not a priest. Just a quiet guy with a rare specialty. Clay tablets, that sing. Not literally, of course. But this man, let's call him Enlil Sneeze, he insists it's a real name, has a hoard of curious little tablets he claims don't track rations or barley yields or labora lists. These ones, they tell stories. Stories about beer. You settle beside him as he carefully unwraps one from a bundle of worn linen. It's smooth, almost polished from age. He holds it out like a secret. This one, he rasps, is the tale of the beer goddess and the scorpion pot. You blink. That's new. He begins to recite as your fingers trace the symbols. The story, as he spins it, tells of Ninkasi, the goddess of brewing, who once crafted a batch so powerful, it knocked the stars out of alignment. To hide her mistake, she poured the remaining brew into a scorpion-shaped vessel and buried it under a date palm. Legend says anyone who drinks from that pot gains insight into the future, but only if they hiccup 3 times first. Now, is this actual canon mythology? Historians still argue whether stories like this were widely believed or just ancient tavern jokes passed around by overworked brawls and bored scribes. But the presence of these narrative tablets suggests that beer wasn't only practical, it was mythical. You leaf through more tablets. One details a brewing contest between rival goddesses. Another is a hymn in praise of the golden foam that laughs. There's even a fragmentary play in which beer speaks as a character, bragging about how it can make kings dance and soldiers cry. And here's the quirky gem. One badly preserved tablet contains a mock legal trial between a loaf of bread and a jar of beer. The bread accuses beer of making people lazy. Beer counters that without her, no one would get through a day of honest labor. It's absurd. It's hilarious. It's strangely familiar. Suddenly, these aren't just relics, they're echoes of laughter. Whispers of personality. People sitting around fires, turning their relationship with beer into poems, skits, satire. You can almost hear it, the low chuckles, the clinks of drinking straws, someone slurring through the roll of beer jar number 2. You ask Enlil's sneeze where he got these tablets. He shrugs. Some I traded for. Some washed up near the old canal after the flood. He points to a clay lump half buried in a basket. That one's still drying. This raises a bigger question. How many beer-related texts were lost to time? How many were never official records, never stored in temple vaults, but tucked into village corners like this, quietly decomposing, untranslatable until now? Fringe archaeologists speculate there could be entire genres of ancient beer literature, plays, songs, even riddles buried beneath layers of sand and bureaucracy. Mainstream scholars roll their eyes, of course, but you're starting to wonder. If people joked about beer, sang about it, worshipped it, and paid each other with it, why wouldn't they write stories about it? You stay with Enlil's sneeze a while longer, listening as he chants a half-remembered lullaby. When the moon is low and the jar is full, may the foam rise high and your dreams go dull. It's sleepy, silly, but also beautiful in its way. Eventually, you help him carefully pack the tablets back into their linens, setting each one down like a miniature soul. As you leave, you pass 2 kids reenacting one of the stories, one pretending to be the beer goddess, the other crawling around as the scorpion pot. It ends with a fake hiccup and a dramatic collapse into the dust. Perfect. You smile, but something about it sticks with you. The idea that beer wasn't just tracked or rationed. It was remembered. Memorialized in clay, myth, and mischief. Passed down not just as a recipe, but as a feeling. A sense of what it meant to live a hard life, and still find time to laugh, to sing, and to sip something warm and bitter and real. You turn back one last time and wave to the old man. He doesn't wave back, but he lifts a tiny jar in salute. And somehow, that's better. You head back toward the city, the sun now higher in the sky, a slow smolder turning the walls to honey-colored mirrors. Your feet trace familiar patterns along the dusty paths, weaving through the crowd like a barley grain in a mash vat, slow, persistent, necessary. But now you're not just looking at Mesopotamia through the lens of beer as ration or reward. You're starting to see it as a system, a rhythm. And like any system, someone has to keep it from collapsing in on itself like a poorly sealed fermentation jar. That someone? Bureaucrats. Yeah, it's time to talk about the clay-caked, nose-to-tablet army of Mesopotamian administrators who made sure everyone got their fair-ish share of the golden brew. You make your way toward a large administrative building near the temple complex, where the walls are lined with niches stuffed with tablets. It smells like clay dust and human stress. Inside, a clerk, young, anxious, probably hasn't had his daily ration yet, grunts a hello and waves you toward the record room. And there it is, shelf after shelf of neat stacks, organized not by content but by delivery routes, overseers, and brew type. You almost expect to hear an ancient version of elevator music. Here, scribes use a stylus like a modern office drone uses a spreadsheet. Every worker's beer entitlement is written down, broken into delivery windows, temple allocations, and even seasonal fluctuations. You glance at one tablet. Harvest Cycle 6. 2 siler of sour beer daily to Enuma, Oxentender. Delivery via Canal Route B alternate if reads block passage. It's meticulous. It's also kind of hilarious, because you know someone still didn't get their beer that day and blamed it on canal delays. This is where things get complicated. Beer rations weren't just handed out willy-nilly. They depended on status, duty, workload, and even your political alignment. Temple workers got one tier, farmers another. Soldiers often got extra, but only if they weren't being punished for something stupid, like yelling at the grain accountant or passing out in the canal. And yes, there were punishments. One scribe's note documents a worker demoted from 2 sila to 1 for failure to complete assigned flax pounding. Imagine losing half your beer because you got lazy with plants. Historians still argue whether these systems were strictly enforced or just idealized projections from the bureaucratic elite. Some records suggest ration plans that clearly outstrip the storage capacity available. Others show last-minute corrections, scratched in tablet corners that scream, "Oops, we forgot Bob." Still, the scope of it all is mind-boggling. You pause at one oversized ledger slab, it lists over 800 names and their exact daily beer shares, along with their roles, ages, and, amusingly, the number of days they've shown up late. It's HR meets Oktoberfest. And here's a weird tidbit: archaeologists found small, palm-sized tablets that acted like punch cards. Workers would bring them in to verify their ration eligibility, and the scribe would mark it with a stylus notch, 1 clay tick for every beer earned. It's like the world's slowest loyalty card system. You move deeper into the vault, where the air grows stale and the tablets older. Here, records date back before Uruk even had full temples. The beer entries here are cruder, scratched in with barely-formed symbols. One simply says, 2 jars. 4 digging. That's fair. No names. No dates. Just an early glimpse into an economy that hadn't yet realized how obsessed it was about to become with detail. A clerk sneezes loudly behind you, knocking over a small pile of tablets. You help him restack them. His hands shake slightly, probably from too much heat and not enough hydration. You hand him a water skin, and he gives a tired smile. "Clay's thirsty work," he says. You nod. So is life. These were the unsung middlemen of ancient beer society. Not brewing it. Not drinking it in stories. Just tracking it, making sure the barley entered the right mash vats, the jars reached the right hands, the numbers added up at the end of the day. And the terrifying thing? They were good at it. The sheer administrative precision in some of these documents rivals modern spreadsheets. In one tablet, you spot a cross-check of how many jars were sent to a fishing village versus how many were returned with seals intact. Someone had clearly gotten suspicious. Was it theft? Spoilage? The result's lost, but the suspicion lingers like a stale hop. There's even one record you read that you wish you could frame. Delivery of 3 beer jars to the Temple of Ishtar delayed due to goat blockage. Rescheduled for morning tide. Goat blockage. Ancient Mesopotamian logistics in one perfect phrase. You exit the office, blinking in the bright sunlight, your mind spinning with columns, categories, and quantities. The city doesn't look the same anymore. Every cart you pass, every jar, every line at a ration stall, it's all part of this massive network. An invisible beer bloodstream pulsing through Sumer, Akkad, Ur, and beyond. And all of it hinges on clay. Not just to hold the beer, but to hold the proof. Proof that you worked. That you mattered. That someone owed you that one, delicious, cloudy, slightly warm jar of fermented cereal and river water. And honestly, that's kind of beautiful. The wind shifts today, warm and dry like an oven cracking open at midday. You wrap your scarf tighter around your nose, because this next part of the journey, it stinks of desperation. And spoiled grain. You wake in a time when things are going wrong. Crops have failed, canal levels have dropped, and people whisper that the gods are either asleep or annoyed. You don't know which is worse. Because today, beer is running out. At first, it's subtle. You pass a ration stall and hear the vendor muttering under her breath, "Less than yesterday, again." Workers fidget in line, eyes flicking toward the temple storehouses as if they might magically overflow. But they don't. The guards just shake their heads, and a few laborious walk away empty-handed. You follow a cart rolling by, once filled with frothy clay jars, now rattling with only 3. The driver looks ashamed. Like he's failed not just his route, but some deeper contract with his people. You feel it in your bones, something has snapped in the balance of the brew. In Mesopotamia, beer wasn't just nice to have, it was daily life. So when beer dries up, society gets cranky fast. Angry. And a little weird. A young scribe you meet that afternoon is sweating bullets over his tablet. He's trying to recalculate barley inputs for a temple brewery, hoping to stretch the rations without sparking a riot. You glance over his shoulder and spot his math, increasingly desperate fractional allocations. 1.6 sila becomes 1.2, then just 0.75. Barely a mouthful. He sighs and says, "I'm going to get speared over this, aren't I?" You pat his shoulder and lie, "Nah. The thing is, this isn't the first time beer has vanished." Historians still argue whether certain periods of beer famine were caused more by drought, war, or bureaucratic failure. The tablets don't always say, but clues show up in the form of sudden legal disputes, emergency barley loans, or hastily edited ledgers where old ration promises get scratched out and replaced with cold silence. One tablet reads, "The worker Shulgi did not receive his beer this day. His complaint was noted." That's it. No resolution. Just a formal shrug on clay. You sit down beside a farmer in the marketplace, his face as creased as a weathered scroll. He points to a jar in front of him, half filled with brackish, poorly fermented beer. 3 sons, 1 jar, he mutters. "What would you do?" You don't answer. What can you say? Across the city, signs of unrest bubble like a bad batch of mash. Temple guards patrol more heavily. Workers grumble at the gates. You hear someone loudly accusing a merchant of watering down the brew. It ends with a thrown sandal and a toppled stall. It could have been worse. But it will be. Because when beer rations dip too low, people don't just get cranky. They crack. There's a strange energy in the air. Like everyone's walking around with a clay jar in their hands, and no one's sure if it's full, empty, or about to be taken from them. You pass a tavern that's eerily quiet. Inside, the owner, an elderly alewife with sunken cheeks, has posted a crude sign at the door. "No beer today. Pray harder." You walk in anyway. Sit. She brings you a small cup of barley broth. Warm, bland, and completely unfermented. You sip. It tastes like failure. She shrugs. Can't brew with dust. Her voice carries the weight of generations who've dealt with feast and famine. But even she seems uncertain this time. You ask what she'll do next. "Trade," she says. "Maybe salt. Or tears." People always got tears. And here's a fringe theory for you. Some scholars think Mesopotamian beer shortages may have led to the very first experiments in non-grain brewing, dates, figs, even palm sap. Desperate innovation born from thirsty chaos. There's little surviving evidence, but a few odd tablets hint at brews that soured sweet or bubbled without grain. You wonder what those tasted like. Probably like regret. You leave the tavern and make your way back toward the city's main temple. There, in the long shadows of the ziggurat, a priest reads out rations from a chipped tablet, his voice strained. 1/2 sila to full workers. None for idle. Next distribution in 3 days. The crowd murmurs. 3 days. Someone throws a stone. Not at him, just into the dirt. But it's enough to make the guards grip their spears a little tighter. Beer has always been social glue. Take it away, and cracks start showing. Back near the grain warehouses, a side door is left ajar. You peek inside and see scribes huddled around a table, whispering furiously. One of them smuggles a jar under his cloak and slips out. You raise an eyebrow. That wasn't protocol. Beer theft. A problem as old as beer itself. One ancient inscription warns, "He who takes the temple brew before its measure shall have no shadow under the moon." Creepy. And yet, entirely understandable when your family hasn't had a proper drink in days. Eventually, the city begins to quiet. People go home, not because things are better, but because there's nothing left to fight over. They light small fires. They boil barley into thin soup. They wait. You join a group of weary workers reclining under the stars, their clay cups mostly empty. Someone offers a few drips from their jar. It's sour, but it's something. You nod in thanks. The night feels heavier than usual. A bit softer around the edges. You close your eyes and listen to the dry wind blowing through the palm trees, carrying the scent of dust, grain, and distant thunder. And you realize, when beer runs out, the soul of a city doesn't vanish. It just holds its breath, waiting for the next pour. You wake to shouting, half panic, half joy. You blink against the bright light pouring through a reed canopy and realize someone is running past your doorway, waving a clay cup in the air like a victory flag. "Bees back," they yell. Barley ships came in overnight. You stretch, groggy, dust-covered, and slightly skeptical. After all, yesterday felt like the end of the world. Today, apparently, it's back to happy hour. You step outside, rubbing sleep from your eyes, and follow the growing crowd toward the docks. The canal is bustling, boats groan under the weight of fresh sacks of grain. Temple officials shout orders as workers offload cargo like ants on a sugar rush. You spot a familiar clerk from the ration office, his nose deep in a clay ledger. He doesn't even look up as he says, "We're going to need a lot of styluses today." Beer, it seems, flows again. What you're witnessing now is a recovery not just of supply, but of rhythm. Mesopotamia, like your body after too little sleep and too much stress, has bounced back with a vengeance. Historians still argue whether this boom-and-bust beer cycle was due to genuine agricultural unpredictability or cleverly engineered temple economics. Some believe shortages were sometimes exaggerated to tighten control, create dependency, or manage morale. Others think it was just nature being, well, nature. Either way, the show must go on. And today's act. The return of mass brewing. You make your way to one of the major temple breweries, a sprawling compound that smells of soaked grain, yeast, and morning sweat. Workers are already back in their routines, milling barley, hauling water, stirring giant tubs with wooden paddles that look more like oars. A priestess oversees the mash preparation, her robe stained with hops and authority. She nods at you. "We brew for the goddess first," she says, motioning to a small ceremonial jar placed beside the main vat. "She got us the barley. We pay her in foam." It's hard to argue with that logic. The process unfolds with near-religious precision. The malted barley is soaked again and again, drained, then mashed into a thick slurry. Fermentation begins, wild yeast in the air latches on greedily, and bubbles begin to rise like something awakening from a long nap. It's messy, smelly, and deeply comforting. There's even music, drums, flutes, the clink of jars. One boy sings a chant that repeats, "Warm the grain, stir the soul," until it sounds like both a lullaby and a commandment. You pass a group of workers giggling around a fermentation vat. Someone tells a joke about beer so strong it made a goat speak Sumerian. You don't understand the punchline, but their laughter is infectious. It's the sound of relief. But not everyone is cheerful. You spot an older man hunched near a wall, his eyes fixed on the brew but his hands motionless. When you ask him what's wrong, he murmurs, "Too late for me. My son's gone north for salt trade. He left during the famine." And just like that, you remember, even in times of abundance, losses linger. Beer may return, but not everyone it left behind does. Still, life resumes. At the ration stalls, Long lines form once more, but the mood is brighter. People joke, gossip, and speculate wildly about how long this new supply will last. 3 moons, says one woman confidently. 6 weeks, a man counters, clutching his token with the air of someone who's guessed wrong before. You hold your own ration cup now, freshly filled. The liquid is cloudy, golden, with a warm, sour aroma. You sip. And it's glorious. Not just for the taste, though that helps, but for what it represents. You're tasting balance. For Mesopotamians, beer wasn't a luxury. It was a stabilizer, a reward, a ritual, a rhythm. When it flowed, things felt right, predictable, just. And so, today's brew is more than a beverage. It's a promise that you've made it through the lean season, that the system still works, more or less, that the scribes, the priests, the brewers, and the barley gods have realigned the cosmos, one frothy cup at a time. There's a fun little tidbit tucked in the back of one ration tablet you read earlier. Upon return of grain, the overseer gave a double portion to those who did not complain. You smile. Whether it's true or not, it's a great management tactic. And the city, it breathes again. Markets buzz. Bakers reopen their ovens. Even the goats seem less obnoxious today. You pass a child playing with a miniature clay jar, pretending to distribute rations to her dolls. She scolds one. No beer for you. You skipped flax duty. You can't help but chuckle. This is how traditions survive, not just through priests and scribes, but through games, rituals, and stubborn muscle memory. And here's a quiet observation you begin to piece together. Beer in Mesopotamia isn't just economic. It's symbolic. Rationed beer isn't just about calories or hydration. It's about belonging. When you receive your share, you're part of the machine, the story, the sacred order. When you don't, well, you're forgotten. So today, with your cup full and your place restored, you lean against a sun-warmed wall, letting the buzz of the city wash over you like a well-earned nap. Someone nearby starts humming an old brewing song again. Warm the grain, stir the soul. You hum along. And somewhere, in the deepest storerooms of the temple, another tablet is inscribed. Another worker's name is logged. Another tally mark is made. Life goes on. You lean against a low mud brick wall as dusk settles over the rooftops of the city, your half-empty clay cup balanced on your knee. The air smells of sweet grain, hearth smoke, and whatever incense someone's burning to thank the goddess Ninkasi. And you're thinking, not for the first time, this entire civilization runs on barley breath. The beer is back, sure. But now you wonder, how did people know it was coming back? How did the temple know when to ration, when to release, when to withhold? You glance at a passing scribe, tablet tucked under one arm, stylus tucked behind his ear like a chef's favorite knife. And that's when it clicks. Someone, somewhere, is tracking all of this. Not just who gets beer, but why, when, and how much over time. You're about to enter the deeply nerdy, yet incredibly powerful world of Mesopotamian data tracking. Because long before Excel sheets or barcodes, there were reeds, wet clay, and obsessive humans. And they created a system so granular, it tracked the equivalent of beer receipts, by worker name, job type, output, and sometimes even attitude. You walk into the scribe hall at dusk and find it humming. Not with conversation, but with the soft scrape of styluses carving lines, wedges, and dots into damp tablets. You hear a scribe mutter, "She didn't bring the grain. She gets half the portion." Another one adds, "New brewer is slow. Note it." The tablets around you are small but mighty. One documents daily rations for female weavers, each listed by name, the amount of beer they receive, and sometimes, delightfully, the reason. Like, Dada, one siler, wove 5 cubits, smiled at the overseer. Was that a joke? A bribe? or a legit productivity metric? Historians still argue whether certain notations on tablets were formalized performance reviews or just grumpy scribes editorializing their workdays. Either way, it gives you a window into a society where everything was measured. You pass a tablet titled, "List of those who received barley for brewing, month of the festival." And under it, Shulgiira, 3 Sila, high-quality foamy brew. Belit Sin, 2 Sila, late with last batch. Ninsen, 4 Sila, goddess offering priority. You trace your finger over the cuneiform wedges and realize that Mesopotamian scribes weren't just record keepers. They were administrators, budget analysts, logistics managers, and possibly the first beer accountants in history. And they tracked it all. Where the grain came from, when it was received, who milled it, how much was lost during processing, who was absent, who got fired, who drank too much. In one hilarious tablet found near Nipper, a frustrated overseer notes, "Mash went missing. Suspect, Kudur, who stumbled before noon." Classic Kudur. You head deeper into the record room, and the tablets start getting thicker, more complex. These weren't daily logs, they were trend reports. Totals by month, averages across seasons. You even find one massive ledger tracking multiple years of brewing output across 5 temple complexes. That's bananas. Or barley nanas. And while you're standing there marveling at ancient analytics, it hits you, these records are less about the beer, and more about the machine that made beer possible. The scribes used standardized symbols and number systems, usually sexagesimal, based on 60, to log everything. 1 sila was a common measurement for beer rations, roughly equal to a modern liter. But they could split it down into fractions so tiny, it's like tracking pennies in your couch cushions. Even more impressively, they tracked qualitative data. Some rations were tagged as low quality, sour, or strong. And they'd note who got what, whether you were a high-ranking priest or a worker digging irrigation ditches barefoot in 105-degree heat. You glance at one scribe who's rubbing his eyes. You ask, "Don't you ever get tired of this?" He smirks. "Sometimes. But the beer doesn't count itself." Good point. There's a quirky detail historians love to debate. Some scribes seem to have had personal flair, decorating tablets with little flourishes, spacing names in aesthetic patterns, even including doodles or symbols for fun. It's possible that beer record tablets were occasionally customized depending on the scribe's personality. Can you imagine? A little doodle of a tipsy goat next to someone's overdue mash count. As you leave the scribe hall, night has fallen, and you're thinking about the implications of all this. These weren't just dusty logs. They were the nervous system of Mesopotamia's economy. Without them, you wouldn't have a beer ration system. You wouldn't have known how much barley needed to be planted next season, or when to send a shipment upriver, or how many workers to reassign from bricklaying to brewing. In a way, these tablets are the civilization. But here's the twist. Most of them weren't stored forever. Once the information aged out, like old receipts, they were often recycled. Scribes would soak the clay, scrub off the markings, and reuse them. Which means that most of what we know about Mesopotamian beer tracking survives only by accident, broken tablets tossed aside, fallen between floorboards, or buried in abandoned buildings. You pick up a shard lying in the dust and trace your finger along its edge. It once held someone's daily brew count. Maybe a name. Maybe a joke. Now it's just pottery. But once, it kept a whole world turning. You wake to the rhythmic splash of canal water against stone. The city stirs early this morning, but not for another barley shipment or temple ritual. Today, everyone's dressed a bit nicer, voices a touch more excited. You ask a woman brushing her hair by a window, and she smiles. It's redistribution day. You blink. Didn't we just get beer? She nods, tying her hair into a loop with a strip of linen. Yes. But now they reshuffle. And just like that, you're swept into one of Mesopotamia's most curious rituals, not about the making of beer, or the drinking of it, but the redistributing of it across a society constantly adjusting, balancing, and recalibrating its social machinery. At the heart of it all is a concept as old as the gods: equilibrium. Mesopotamian cities, especially temple states like Ur and Lagash, didn't just hoard resources. They reallocated them. Carefully. Often. And sometimes dramatically. Especially after shortages, plagues, or successful harvests. When something changed, be it rain patterns, labor surpluses, or tax collection, the scribes updated the books. And beer. That was their most dependable currency. Today, temple officials spread out into the city, holding fresh ration tablets etched just hours ago. Each one reflects a new status. Maybe your share went up. Maybe it shrank. Maybe you got moved to a new job entirely. There's buzz in the air, a sense of lottery meets performance review. Historians still argue whether this redistribution process was merit-based, politically motivated, or just a tool for social control. One school of thought suggests it was deeply ritualistic, even cosmic, meant to reweigh the human side of the divine scales. Another argues it was more cynical, a way for elites to maintain order by keeping everyone guessing. Either way, it worked. You follow a scribe delivering new ration assignments to a weaving household. The women line up silently. One by one, he reads their names aloud and hands them tiny tablets, barely palm-sized. Enatum, 2 sila daily. Maintains prior output. Lilitum, 1.5 sila. Dropped 2 bundles last month. Goudia, 3 sila. Added over time. Commended. And then, with a theatrical pause. Iltani, none. Transferred to temple kitchen duty. Iltani doesn't flinch, but her jaw tightens. It's not just a job change, it's a social downgrade. Kitchen duty often meant longer hours, lower beer, and fewer chances to sneak sips. You walk with her afterward, unsure what to say. She shrugs. I'll earn my way back. Stir enough stew, and they'll notice. That's the strange power of this system. It punishes, but never fully abandons. There's always a route back in if you work, serve, submit. If you play the game. In another part of town, you stumble into a lively dispute. 2 millers are arguing over who deserves more barley for the next brewing cycle. I processed 20 sacks, one man shouts. With how many stones cracked, the other counters. They storm off to the local adjudicator, a grey-bearded man in layered robes who rolls his eyes before digging into a stack of tablets like a judge rifling through old case law. This isn't just chaos. It's bureaucracy at its finest. And also, weirdly, hopeful. Because in a world without coin currency, your value is tracked not by what you own, but what you do. And beer. Beer is the scoreboard. You sit for a while outside the granary, watching as people come and go, some happy, some less so. One worker practically skips past, waving his new ration tablet in the air. Double portion, he crows. Finally got notice. Another follows behind, muttering, not worth the extra mud hauling. Even the children get involved. A girl you recognize from earlier clutches a tiny replica ration tablet made of wax and pressed with her initials. She hands it to her friend and says solemnly, 1 sip per song you sing. 2 if it's funny. Adorable. And unsettlingly accurate. You duck into a side courtyard for some shade, and there you find something remarkable. A wall covered in plaster, smoothed daily, and used by the scribes to practice redistribution plans before they're officially recorded. It's like a whiteboard. But 4,000 years old. You see names scratched in, lines drawn between workers and job types, and beer volumes listed beside each. Someone's even sketched a rough diagram of how barley shipments will move next season, like an ancient logistics map. It's a perfect snapshot of how deep this went. Mesopotamians weren't just improvising, they were constantly tweaking the formula. What made them so obsessed with getting the balance right? Well, probably because they had so much to lose if they didn't. A failed redistribution meant hunger, rebellion, priest blame, angry gods, and worst of all, temples with no offerings, which meant no divine protection. Beer, in this sense, was a sacrament of stability. There's even a weird but wonderful fringe theory some scholars whisper about, that certain cities used astrological cycles to time redistributions. One broken tablet from Uruk hints at a beer allocation for the year of the lion's tail, which might have been tied to celestial events. Was the zodiac quietly influencing who got more foam? Hard to say. You leave the courtyard and make your way to the central ziggurat, where the high priest is finishing a ritual. A bowl of barley has been poured over a flame. He raises a cup, murmurs something in ancient Sumerian, and takes a symbolic sip. Balance restored, he declares. And just like that, the new cycle begins. The workers disperse with fresh assignments. The brewers roll up their sleeves. The scribes grab clean tablets. You linger a moment longer, watching the steam rise from the priest's cup. Balance, indeed. The city exhales as evening drapes across its rooftops. The last of the temple bells fade into the distance, and the scent of roasted grain and baked bread lingers in the alleyways. You wander slowly now, feet dusty, head heavy, not just from the heat or the beer, but from everything this society manages to hold in its hands. And somehow, your hands too. The beer rations of ancient Mesopotamia weren't just about drink. They were scaffolding, propping up labor systems, gender roles, divine relationships, and political control. Every sip passed from priest to brewer to laborer whispered the story of who mattered, who served, and who watched the skies while clay dried in the sun. You step inside one of the larger breweries one last time. It's almost quiet now. The day's final batch is fermenting, covered in woven mats. A few women scrape residues from the sides of vats into clay bowls, humming softly as they work. The fire is low, the air thick with that unmistakable tang, yeasty, wet, and a little sour. The smell of tomorrow's economy. On the far wall, a series of tablets hangs like plaques. You step closer, squinting at the marks. Worker rotation list. Sila output, spring season. Complaint filed, mash too thin to please goddess. Even the goddess had taste. One brewer, elbows deep in sticky mash, glances up and grins. You again. You nod, watching the torchlight flicker on his sweaty forehead. He says, "We made it strong today. For the festival." What festival? He winks. Whatever one you're here for. You smile, not pressing further. Because of course, it doesn't really matter what the occasion is. What matters is that the beer is made, recorded, rationed, and poured. The rest, celebration, status, offering, is context. And they've been perfecting that context for thousands of years. One more night. One more ledger. One more round. Historians still argue whether the Mesopotamian beer system ever reached a breaking point, whether over-rationing or fraud or sheer complexity caused collapse. Some tablets suggest reforms. Others vanish mid-series, as if a scribe simply stopped showing up. But what's undeniable is this. Beer helped build one of humanity's first great civilizations. Not by inebriation, but by integration. It wove itself into faith, wages, punishments, and praise. It wasn't a luxury, it was the logic of daily life. You walk out into the courtyard, where a few boys are drawing cuneiform symbols in the dust with sticks. One of them carefully presses a reed into the sand, copying the shape for Sila. His friend adds a crude picture of a smiling man with an enormous cup. Then they both laugh and stomp it out. Even here, at the edge of the system, the language of beer lives on. You sit beneath a tamarisk tree, the wind stirring the dry leaves like whispering parchment. Far above, the stars are poking through the velvet night, slow, deliberate, like a god's memory reloading itself. And slowly, your eyes begin to close. Let your breath ease as the sounds of the city fall away. No more scribes scratching clay, no temple bells, no barley grinding wheels turning in their long wooden cradles. Only the soft hush of wind over sand, the fading aroma of earth and yeast, and the warmth of a world slowly tilting toward rest. You're safe here, wrapped in the gentle quiet of a place where every detail was counted, measured, and remembered. Where even the smallest sip of beer held meaning. A world where work, worship, and rest all circled one golden drink like moons around a distant planet. Let that rhythm settle in your body now, the cycle of offering, brewing, pouring, recording. Imagine the cool clay of a freshly written ration tablet pressed into your palm, the soft glow of an oil lamp behind it. You've done your part. You've kept the system running. And now, there's nothing left to track. No portions to compare, no output to tally, no scribes peering over your shoulder with their narrow, knowing eyes. Just the deep hum of the desert at night, the trickle of an old canal, the glow of constellations once charted by the same hands that pressed grain into paste and fermented it beneath the gaze of the gods. So wherever you are, whether in your own bed in the present or curled on woven reed mats in the past, know this: the books are balanced. The beer has been shared. The city sleeps. And so can you.